Yeah, and then this one here is 2018, 50 years later. So I revisit, I'm from Memphis, so
Oh, I see.
I revisited there last summer. We have our family reunions every other year there. A lot of folks, a lot of Strongs
That's
in
awesome.
Memphis, yeah. So, and then this, I just wanted to say happy, I leaned it here just to say happy Black History.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So I can just.
Yeah, so you can front. You can front, we can stick this right here. It's the last one.
Right.
50 years later, and I'll say not much has changed. Much as we'd like it to. Are you good?
I can just. Yeah, I can stand somewhere. I'm Aubrey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Longmont Museum, where people of all ages explore history, experience art, discover new ideas through dynamic programs, events, and exhibitions. My name's Justin Veach. I'm the manager of the museum's Stewart Auditorium, and we are coming at you live and direct from the Stewart tonight, a la Facebook, longmontpublicmedia.org, and local Comcast, Channel 8 and 880. Tonight's program is part of our Thursday Nights at the Museum series because they happen on Thursday nights at the museum. That's how we came up with that title, actually. That's still behind the scenes note there. I want to thank the people who make these programs possible, the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Stewart Family Foundation, museum donors and members, and our media sponsor, the mighty KGNU Community Radio out of Deer Boulder, just down the road. And perhaps people like you, if you'd be interested in becoming a member and supporting the Longmont Museum, please visit our website at www.longmontmuseum.org. Membership has its privileges too. When we get back to business, when we get over this COVID stuff, you get free entry to exhibits and discounts on programs, tickets to concerts, etc. Tonight we're very pleased to present part 2 of a very sort of essential conversation. It's the history of race and social justice in Longmont. and we're co-presenting it this evening with the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee. And before I go any further, I'd like to introduce to you Adriana Perea, the lead staff member behind the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee, who will tell you a little bit about LMAC.
Good evening. My name is Adriana Perea. I am the lead staff for the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee. I want to start by thanking our panelist and moderator, Norma Johnson. I want to acknowledge that it takes great courage to be here tonight and share your personal stories with the community. I would also like to thank Justin and the Longmont Museum for creating an environment where we can uplift the voices of community members through this vulnerable and critical conversation. This year, the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee has implemented a new statement, which I will be sharing. The Longmont Multicultural Action Committee is committed to advocating and working together to create a caring, inclusive, and equitable community that embraces, respects, celebrates, and learns from each other. We believe in the importance in cultivating strong connections among community members. We hope tonight's program can help create opportunities for all residents to participate and actively learn and value the different cultures that are a part of our community. LMAC is actively working and supporting programs, strengthening partnerships, promoting civic engagement with the core value that our committee will always strive in being the bridge between the community and the local government. Each year, LMAC's leadership team meets to set meaningful goals for the committee. While the specific goals vary from year to year, they remain consistent in supporting and influence Longmont's sense of community and cultural inclusion. We hope that tonight's program is among the many future engagement opportunities for what we hope will be a lifetime commitment to being the best versions of ourselves in order to continue in creating a welcoming Longmont and safe community for all. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adriana. It's my pleasure to now introduce to you the moderator of tonight's panel, Voices of Change, A History of Race and Social Justice in Longmont, Part 2 of, we hope, however many parts it takes, really. We'll be continuing to have this conversation for the near term. So our moderator this evening is Norma Johnson. And I first met Norma through Elvita Ramos from the Community Foundation of Boulder County. Elvita had approached me with the idea of co-presenting a play by a local playwright called Inheritance. The subject of the play was centered around three women set in the 1920s and how they each kind of dealt with the racism of their time, specifically the KKK at that time in Denver. It was a very powerful play. And I immediately told Elvita, yes, the museum would absolutely love to co-present that play with you. The playwright, of course, was Norma Johnson, and the play lived up to its reputation. It was really moving and very powerful, and Norma spoke afterwards, led us all in a Q&A following the play, and really unpacked some of the themes. And it was transformative for me, and I think for a lot of the people in the audience. And I immediately went up to Norma afterwards and I said, how can we do more? Can we do more together? Can you come back? Can we do stuff? And so she actually came back and joined us for the debut of our Long Monster, which is a late night talk show style program that we just invented last fall. And that was delightful. And now we're at a bit of fun. And tonight, we're bringing her back to lead part 2 of this very meaningful and impactful conversation. It's my privilege to introduce to you Norma Johnson.
Thank you, Justin. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this program of some very important conversation to go on in this community. Before we get going, I'd like to just acknowledge we want to honor the indigenous peoples whose land we reside on here. And these are ancestral lands of people who have culture, tradition, languages, history, and a lot of stories of resistance on this land. The Longmont area is the traditional territory to the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and many Native peoples. So thank you. And, Brett, we have Brett Shelton here from the NARF, Native American Rights Fund. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit for us about why that's important.
Sure. So the nation was built on, among other factors, theft of the land for the most part. Almost all of the land was taken without permission or without agreement. And if you may have learned about treaties, a lot of times the treaties were entered after the fact, after people were run off of the land. And any sort of healing, any sort of reconciliation process, if you look worldwide, anytime any group of people has been harmed by another group, if those two groups seek to reconcile their relationship, the first step is a truth-telling. Well, in America, we don't even tell the truth about the fact that people lived here before, wherever we might be. And so it's starting to become known that we ought to do acknowledgments of what people lived in a place immediately prior to the colonial settlers, basically. And so it's a step towards healing, to just shine a tiny sliver of light of truth on the place where the people are, and to start to recognize that other people had ties before that were ripped apart from them generally. So it's a good first step in truth-telling. Great for healing both sides of the relationship moving forward.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, very important. And if people want to know more about this land that they're on, wherever you are, what would you recommend, Brett?
On the land, wherever you are, there's actually a couple maps that are out on the internet that would be worth looking at. I don't have the sites, just Google stuff. I've been doing land recognition when I go to a different place. Even if I don't speak it, sometimes I just look at it so I can understand the place that I'm going to. And you can find anything on the internet these days. So I say just put a little effort in. It doesn't take much at all.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we're going to roll into this conversation. And I just want to introduce our panelists here. As I said, this is Brett Shelton from the Native American Rights Fund. And we have Martha Locamin. Did I say your last name correctly?
Lochamin.
Locamin. Thank you. And Martha is our Boulder County Board of Supervisors. And we have Glenda Strong Robinson from Longmont Multicultural Action Committee, affectionately known as LMAC. And we have Lauren Jenkins, CEO of Mini Money Management. And we have Jenny Diaz-Leon from the city of Longmont. So we're going to have an opportunity to have everyone just say a little bit more about who they are and what they do. So anybody who wants to start, please go for it.
You got it.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Jenny Diaz-Leon. A little bit about myself. I work for the City of Longmont in the Children, Youth, and Families Division as a program specialist. And I am a proud immigrant. I was born in Durango, Mexico, and I came to Longmont when I was 2 years old. And I lived in Longmont for over 25 years. And although I don't live in Longmont anymore, Longmont's always been a big part of my heart because this is where I grew up. and this is the community that I get to work in. Some of the other programs that I am involved in the community are, I am the chair for the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee. I am a board member for Boulder County. I am also part of the Latino Advisory Council for Representative Joe Neguse. And I am also part of the Padres Involucrados en la Educación Task Force, which is Parents Involved in Education Task Force. And another role that I've had as a city employee as well is I've been part of the connection with Longmont Sister Cities Association, and what we've been trying to do over the last year, or a little bit more than that, is create a Sister Cities relationship with the Northern Arapaho tribe. That's never been done before, so it is quite a big project, but as we heard before, it's part of what we need to do to begin those reparations with the Native people that this land belongs to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Who's next? All right, Lauren.
Yeah, I'll take it. So, hey, I'm Lauren Jenkins. I grew up in Longmont, went to Niwot High School, and I'm currently the CEO of Mini Money Management. So it's a company that my mom and I started, and it's an app there for parents and teachers to educate their kids on the importance of financial literacy. If you look at just the basic statistics of money, the average Black family's net worth is 10 times less than the average white family's. And there's not a whole lot you can do about that now. So instead of complaining about it, I decided to do something about it and educate the next generation so we can start to close that gap.
All right, thank you, Lauren.
May as well move on down the line.
All right.
Hello, everybody. My name is Glenda Strong Robinson. I have to write stuff down. I'm probably the senior in this group. So I am a 40-year resident of Longmont. Moved here in 1980, thinking, God, where have you sent me? I didn't see any Black people for a long time after we moved here with IBM, the I've Been Moved company. My husband was with IBM. But I am a mother, grandmother, small business owner for over 35 years. I've served on many boards and commissions, and I think we'll be talking about that tonight over the years. I'm on the executive committee of the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and I'm also a member of LMAC and the founder of the Dr. Martin Luther King annual celebration. We just finished it, and it's on YouTube if you want to see it. Boulder County Community Celebration. I am an associate minister at Second Baptist Church Boulder, the second woman ordained there in its 113th year history. I'm director of family care and also the historian there. I am a conference speaker, moderator, facilitator, or anything like that you might need. I am a civil rights activist who found myself as a 19-year-old junior, and there are pictures here, I'm a visual person, found myself in the middle of the sanitation strike march on March 29th, 1968. March 28th, sorry, 1968. This march right here, the I Am a Man, and I'm sure Brett can probably attest to the fact that people of color were not always considered full-fledged men. I mean, the 3/5 compromise, I think, was written, and that was just so that there could be votes on one side or the other, the Republican side or the Democrats could get the most. So this is the I Am a Man March. I'm sure many of you have seen this. And then I found myself in the middle of the Dr. Martin Luther King, it was called the Memorial March, because when he came to Memphis on March 28th. If many of you know about that story, a riot erupted, and Dr. King said, I only conduct nonviolent marches. And so he was returned to Atlanta, and vowed to return the following week. He did come back on the night of April 3rd, and you remember that I've been to the mountaintop speech at Mason Temple AME Church. Who knew that that would be his last time on earth? On the night of April 4th, preparing for dinner at the Lorraine Motel, now the National Civil Rights Museum, he was murdered, assassinated, and thus went the king. America thought they killed the dreamer, but is his dream now bigger than ever before? Amen. I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. Glenda, I did that again. I'm sorry. Glenda. All right. Martha.
Good evening. It's such an honor to be here with all of you. I really mean that. It's special. Outside of just the circumstances that we're all in, and also to know that the work of LMAC, I was part of that founding group. I've been a chair in my past lives, and the Longmont Latino Strategic Plan was the work that we put together that then became LMAC. For those of you who are history buffs and are interested, there's a lot of history here locally about addressing inequities throughout Boulder County and specifically in Longmont. I'm here tonight representing the Boulder County Commissioners, and that was the invitation, and some of that is going to get left to the side because I'm here also as a person, a resident here of Longmont. My background is also similarly in financial literacy, in real estate, in mortgage, addressing the financial wealth gap that Lauren talked about. I've also taught. I have a master's in secondary education and have a connection with Jenny Diaz Leon because she had a part in my own household's upbringing with my kiddos. And so it's a special connection for all of us tonight. My background also includes consulting work. Resiliencia para Todos, which is the resiliency for all work that we did after the 2013 flood that also addressed the inequities, and I think we're going to talk about that tonight. The inequities of our specifically monolingual Spanish-speaking community in Boulder County to get to the resources and create relationship with local government. And I would talk about later why that really should be vice versa. And also I've done consulting work around the cultural broker and the ability for us to affect decision-making here locally. So I'm pleased to be here and excited about this conversation.
Well, thank you, Martha. And Brett.
Good evening. I'm Brett Shelton. I'm a staff attorney at the Native American Rights Fund, which is based in Boulder. And I've lived in Longmont since 2009 in the area anyway, this time around. I've lived here kind of 3 times. First time was starting in 1995. Just can't stay away, I guess. I'm a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. My mom is Lakota. That's what the Oglala Sioux tribe is a branch of the Lakota people. And my father's white. And let's see, the Oglala Sioux tribe is based in Pine Ridge, but I actually have ancestors who are buried not too far from here by LaPorte, Colorado, because this was within our Aboriginal territory too. Like was mentioned in the acknowledgement, there were a lot of tribes that used Colorado, and Colorado is actually a pretty central gathering place traditionally for tribes across most of the United States, really, and probably people from south of the Mexican border and north of the Canadian border crossed through here at times too. It was such a central gathering place. I've spent a career basically fighting for the rights of indigenous peoples, primarily North American Indian tribes. That's the legal term that's used to describe them. The proper way to describe them, if you can, is the actual name of the people themselves or the legal name of the tribe, depending on the context. And just really honored to be invited to this circle. Native American folks, a lot of times, the first problem that we face in pursuing our issues is the issue of invisibility. Not only because that's the way the United States policy would have preferred to have us be, is invisible and gone, if you look at it historically, but also because at this time we are in such small numbers that we're often deemed statistically insignificant. So when you see data statistics and so on. They just don't mention us because we're not big enough statistically to make a meaningful difference, I guess. But in the places where we do live and where we're concentrated, we make huge differences. Voting is a big example. As our people have started voting and so on, then we've become pretty impactful. So just glad to be here at the table with everybody. It's really neat at this time too to see the Arapaho people coming back, and it makes me excited to think that they're able to come back and start to establish or reestablish, and more importantly, share what they know about this area, because every place that has a name here has an Arapaho name too. And that name is rooted in people who lived here for hundreds of years and who know what that place means. And so all of us can learn a lot if we can learn what those places are named. So this is an exciting time coming on.
Well, thank you, everybody. This is an exciting time. I'm glad that we get to be a part of that. And I don't know if this mic is coming out, but that's all right. I want to just jump right in, because there's a lot of things I think that people don't necessarily understand if they're not a part of these communities, these marginalized communities that we talk about and that we work with. And there's a certain, we had a little discussion at a meeting we had, and there were some phrases like, the tiptoe dance, walking on eggshells. And I think a lot of people don't really know that there's an everydayness to what we're talking about when we talk about things like racism and marginalization, that if people are navigating their lives on a daily basis, which involves like everything that they do that's connected with and moving about and connected with the institutions, with the dominant culture. So I'd like us to dive in and have some conversation about that. And please feel free to talk to each other, not just to your mic. So let me ask you, so first of all, to speak to that tiptoeing, that dance that goes on with the populations that you work with, what some of that actually looks like, to give people an idea. And then maybe what some of your work does kind of in the name of that, to address that, to help address that particular form of marginalization that you work with people in their communities. So again, just jump in if you got something to say, please.
Well, this may come as a surprise to a lot of people, but racism is still here. We had George Floyd, we had Breonna Taylor, we had the black squares on Instagram, we had people taking knees, slogans, brands. I think Aunt Jemima's getting changed. I love Aunt Jemima. And Uncle Ben. And 2 weeks ago, a 9-year-old black girl was tased by a police officer in my dad's hometown. And 3 months prior to that, they had covered up the police officers putting a bag over one of the, somebody who got arrested over his head, and he suffocated and died. And they didn't release the body cam footage for 6 months because they were trying to hide it. I got on the stage a few months ago, I don't remember when it was, and I said, talking isn't going to do anything. Posting on social media, buy black, it's deeper than that. You have, think about the elementary school around you. There would be a 4th grade kid. What can a 4th grader do to a grown man who is supposed to protect and serve, a government employee, tased a child? And you know what? I didn't even feel that much, because that's what you see every week. If you pay attention, it's not new. So why are we still talking? Do something. Go ahead, y'all.
What do y'all have to say to that?
Thank you for sharing that. Part of the conversation, and it connects to exactly that we had earlier this week, just in preparation, was this concept of walking on eggshells. And it came from this being part 2, and there are a lot of folks out there with good intentions and with their hearts in the right place. And for those of us who are part of the most affected communities, there is the tiptoe dance of something like this happens, and either we're asked to be the representative of what does that mean, or how does that make everybody feel, or every one of your group. And I don't have the right or the privilege or the ability to, most times in those moments, feel the pain that we feel, because we're then carrying on for somebody else or helping someone else walk through why it's difficult for them, or what that means for them, or how they're going to take that to their book study. And so that's, for me, kind of the other question about what is the tiptoe dance. And for me personally, in my professional life, and even here tonight, it's that question of how do we really not just talk about race? How do we not just have a conversation about race? But how do I take my personal experience as an immigrant, as a brown woman, as a professional, when we are enduring microaggression, which is also known as racial violence, over and over and over, as we continue to contribute, to build companies, to work, to lead. And so that, for me, is part of this question about how do we support this type of work, and also call to action. Call people to act and do something more than post on social media or buy your bumper sticker. And I'm hoping that's what we're here to talk about, and give some feedback about it. Thanks, everybody.
So I want to just thank you, Marta. I want to just piggyback a little bit off of that. Remember, I said that I've been here 40 years in Longmont. We moved from Long Beach to Longmont, and I thought, my God, what in the world is going on? I mean, there wasn't Twin Peaks. There wasn't even the mall. There wasn't Twin Peaks Mall. There wasn't the Village at Twin Peaks. All that was fields and all that. But when I first got here, I got here on a Sunday afternoon with my daughter, who was 6, and I was pregnant with my now 40-year-old son. And my husband was sent on an assignment that Monday to Lexington, Kentucky. Shortly thereafter, Juan Luis Garcia and Jeff Cordova were shot by the police. And I don't know, Louis was here the last time, and I think he said he grew up with them. And you have that feeling of, oh my God, this is not good. But I had no idea that months later, on the streets of Southern California, in Signal Hill, California, my nephew, a senior running back at Long Beach State, in his senior year, was planted or scheduled to be drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, was stopped for doing 35 in a 25-mile speed zone on his way to coach a Latino Little League baseball team. 2 hours later, he loses his life by the chokehold. And they said he had superhuman strength and he was this. Anyhow, and so this year marks the 40th year. He was the oldest grandson to my parents. And to your point, Lauren, Lauren, right? Yes, do something. We gotta do something. So many times, if we're not personally affected by it, it doesn't faze us, and so we're not prompted to do anything. So this year, actually last Sunday, he was the oldest grandson to my parents. And my sister, Helen, his mother, only had one child. The rest of us have at least 2 children. She died after Johnny Cochran represented the family and they said, we won. Nobody won. He lost his life. She died right after they paid them whatever $1 million that they were going to pay them. And so, what is the price that we have to continue paying? Freedom is not free. The voting rights, people died. I know people who died for us to have that right to vote. So, back to your point, Lauren, we got to do something. We've got, when John Lewis said, when you see injustice that comes about, say something. You have a moral, we have a moral obligation to do something and to say something. Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Our justice has been threatened beyond belief, but together, us coming together, together we stand, divided we fall. We have all got to stick together because there are issues that affect our very livelihood, and no longer can we say, oh, my 4, no more, that doesn't affect me. I really am not going to speak up or say or do anything because I'm not directly affected. We're put on this planet to take care of each other. Take care of each other and each other's children. We're all, this is one land, one earth, and we're so far off from that right now. I'm telling you, I don't know where it will end. I better stop.
Thank you, Glenda. So, I want to throw in, okay, Jenny, we're going to catch you next. So, we've given just a fraction, a tiny fraction of some of the things that we are addressing in this time, some of the history. So, what I want to know now is, how does this affect the greater community? Because so often, people just look at people of color, and it's like, oh, those people are experiencing all this stuff, or those poor people kind of thing. And what is it that you think people don't necessarily understand? Glenda, when you talk about we're all in this together, what don't you think people necessarily understand about that? About how does this affect our greater community, historically and currently? What do you think?
I'm going to let Jenny talk, but I want to answer that because Maya Angelou said, until America will not be whole until we go back and tell the truth about what happened. What happened to your people? What happened to our people? Tell the truth about slavery. Tell the truth about the 20 people that came here in 1619 against their will on the boat, on the ships. And I saw that last summer at the Smithsonian African American Museum of History and Culture. That was moving to me, being down in that basement and looking at those little ships, little spaces that they had to be brought over against their will. And I mean, so many of them didn't make it. But 20 people landed here in 1619. And we're the remnants of that. And we're still hated. We're still being policed. We're still being gunned down. We were policed then. We were watched over then. And it's still happening. Go ahead, Jenny.
I just wanted to share a little bit of a personal story and then share a little bit more of how that's impacted the work that I do today and why I do the work that I do today, especially working with youth. I grew up in this community, and I can think back to a time when I was in high school, and we were in a government class having a conversation about immigration. So at the time, I was an undocumented student. Later on, I did have the privilege to receive documentation, but I want you to understand how at a young age this begins. At a young age, we start feeling that feeling of the tiptoeing, or the feeling of maybe not being able to have a voice, because that might have repercussions. And I remember this so clearly. The words that were spoken in that class is, I just want all those illegal Mexicans to be kicked out. All they are killers, criminals, rapists. And me being an undocumented student in that classroom, those words stuck with me. I felt invisible. I felt like I didn't have a voice. I felt like I didn't matter. So when you think about what impact that has in the community, that can change people's futures. In the work that I do today with youth, a big piece of what I want to do is I want to empower them to feel like they have a voice. I think with the younger generations, we expect them to rise up, but we don't give them the support to actually share their voice, share their opinions, share their ideas, and they're so rich. They have so much knowledge that if we take some time to listen, we might learn more from them than we might be teaching them. So with my experiences that I had, I want to make sure that the other people, other youth, don't have that experience growing up. I want them to feel supported. I want them to know that their voice matters and they can create change.
Well, thank you, Jenny. That's a beautiful example of taking the past and bringing it forward. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Somebody, can we have who maybe hasn't had a chance to speak? Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit to the impact on the community at large of these kind of things too. I think it's really important. And looking white, a lot of white people confide in me when they don't know who I really am. And so it gives me a rare window into the world. And I think really it's been hitting me lately that the choice is whether people want to keep living in fear. Because I think there's this hierarchical system that exists that with its privilege and with its power and control, and most of the time that's based on how well you know the rules and where you happen to be born into, and what sorts of things set people apart from others. And so it's really easy. Kirsten Wilson did a great play, I think it was the Paper Moon play, where she deconstructed, she was dealing with immigration and the racism around immigration, but it went deeper than she went into slavery and so on. And I guess she went back to a time where slavery wasn't a racial issue initially in America. And then it became a convenient way to separate people from one from another. And so then it became a racial thing. And all of that is about one class of people feeling like they're better than others and feeling like they're going to maintain a slightly higher level in that hierarchy. And so the fear comes when you feel like that's being toppled and you're going to lose status, I think. And so I think that explains the rise in like vitriolic reactions when we had a black president. I think it explains the hate that just came bubbling up when a woman was running for president and there was a chance she might get it, because people felt like the rules were being changed and they might not enjoy the same position of privilege. Because where that vitriol comes from for the most part, is people who are really not that well off in a lot of ways, but somehow they want to maintain that they have some sort of something still over everybody else. And if you start messing with their perception of what's going to hold it in place, then that becomes a real problem. So the choice is, do you want to live in fear or not? And when you're not part of that system, you find the strength in love. And it sounds kind of cheesy, but every spiritual tradition and every intellectual tradition, I think, boils humankind's fate down to the battle of fear and love and the courage to have love. So I think the impact on the community when our communities, when our families and our relatives have to suffer, is that the community writ large is forced to continue living in fear. And those who are going to feel the fear versus those who are going to operate out of love from positions of privilege and help others, it's never going to get better, I mean, it's a continued life of fear and it's passed on. So I think that's the problem until we start to deal with this and until we somehow reach through to them and show them how not to fear or overcome all of that fear with more and more love and empowered love. We're stuck. So we got to figure a way out of that. And that's kind of a big answer, but that's just what's been striking me lately on the issues that's related.
You just hit such a core piece of our humanity, which is what we're talking about, right? You know, we're talking about incidents and things going on, but at the real base of it is that humanity piece. I'm going to take a moment to read a poem, since you brought up love. It's called Let Love Win. What do you say to letting love win? Is it painful? Does it hurt? Is it frightening? Does it take you by surprise when they love you like you've always wanted? What do you say to letting love win? Is there a crack of least resistance where it can seep in and slowly replenish the dry, dry desert in your heart? What do you say to letting love win? Do you speak at all? Are there words of grace and belovedness? Or only the fire from the parched and lonely dwelling place of your insecure and frightened mind? What if you said, I let love win? Would the rocks come tumbling down the mountain and crush your soul? Or would a fire catch hold that you could never put out? Okay, that was a commercial break. Back to our conversation. So, anybody else want to chime in on that?
I will, because actually it kind of connects with what you both said, and that was helpful to me. Because we're also here to talk about actions, and some of them can be small, and I appreciated Jenny sharing her story because it brought me back to this moment as a high schooler, as a high school senior getting ready to make what was going to be, I thought, the biggest decision of my future at that moment. And I went in to talk to my high school counselor thinking that she'd have all the answers, right? Sure, certainly she would know what's next for me. And when I told her I wanted to go to college, she said no. She said you could look at maybe a VOTEC, and the college is not for you. And those are the words. Those are the words to our youth, but also to our community members. And so that reminds me, like, what are the small ways that we can change the language that we use to talk about each other? And maybe those are the acts of love. If we're just able to, even if we have differences of opinions or parties or whatever it might be, can we just act out of love? And it might be something as simple as using words of encouragement, but it might also be using words talking about our community members as residents, to include all of us instead of citizens. And it might be using words of he or she or they instead of you have to be a girl or you have to be a boy or the appropriate. But really, what is the work that we can do together? And I did go on to CU Boulder. And at CU Boulder, Dr. Lisa Facio was the first woman of color in a position of authority that, to me, education seemed like the way for me to not lose something, because I did believe, and I do believe, that nobody can take our education away from us. And so that piece of representation, to have this beautiful, educated woman in front of me, then took me back on my path to get my master's in secondary ed so that I could come back to my community and be that teacher who worked so hard to figure out how can I encourage support and talk about financial literacy and have the tough questions and talk to my white students as well and their families and tell them, hey, this might be the only time you have an opportunity to have a candid conversation with a woman who loves your student and who is on your side and who cares for you. And so that to me is, how does it affect our greater community as well? To have people who represent those communities that maybe folks don't know about, or maybe they're uncomfortable about, or maybe they're still in fear about. And so those are some of the pieces that I want to, what are the small actions that might start with language that we can respond to the incidents and say the reality of what happened is Black men and women in our country are being murdered. This is not racial unrest to me. This is violence and murder about specific communities of color in our country. And when we can change the way that we talk about it, I think that shows that we love and respect each other.
Thank you, Martha. I want to take what you said and roll that into, and I want to ask panel members, because we all have some kind of privilege, right? Just off the bat, one privilege I can think of that I have that actually has taken me places that it doesn't take maybe some other people is just being able to speak, I'm gonna call it white, all right? Because I can be on the phone and be talking to an organization, a business, and the assumption is that I'm educated, that I might know what I'm talking about, et cetera, just because of the way I speak. So that's a privilege that I have, right? We all have some kind of privilege. How can we, everybody, how can we use the privilege that we do have, whatever that is, to make changes? Jenny.
This reminds me of a quote, and when I heard this, it stuck with me. And it's from Carmen Ramirez, and she had said that if you're not at the table, that meaning the decision-making table, then you're what's on the menu. And what that speaks to me is that we need to be able to be at the table, to voice those opinions, to speak for others and uplift their voices, to be able to create change for those communities. If you aren't there at the table, then you miss an opportunity to create change in your community. Bringing that back to youth, it starts as simple as representation. When you talked about representation in student council, representation in AP classes and concurrent enrollment, right? If you're not there, you're missing an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. What other kind of ways can we leverage our privilege?
I mean, I had the privilege of my parents doing everything they could to make us a middle-class family. So I didn't have to grow up around the types of racism that a lot of people talk about in the news. And my privilege is being one of the few Black people out here, as backwards as that may sound. Because for some reason, when there's not as many of us, and you're surrounded by a lot of people who feel safe, because it's just me, you'll listen. You could take that however you want, but my privilege is that here, in this town, in this county even, I'm not a danger. So I'm gonna use that because my parents did everything they could to make sure that's the way that I grew up.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Anybody else? Leveraging our privilege?
It has to be said, as the first Latina Boulder County Commissioner and the first person of color, and I'm not speaking on the behalf of the Board of County Commissioners right now, but it is a significant privilege, and with that privilege comes a great responsibility and a lot of pressure, and I talk about similarly about the burden and the blessing of being bilingual. When my oldest son was maybe 2.5, we were at a local hospital, and he was having a baby root canal. And we spoke Spanish at home, and the curtain opened next to us, and a Spanish-speaking family asked for help. They needed help translating, and they didn't have an interpreter with their medical provider, and the blessing is I could respond. And the burden was my son was in pain, and that's the burden and then the blessing. And I think about that when I talk about privilege, because it's a strong opportunity to serve my community in a way that I've built my life around, to be at the table. And everybody chooses their own way. For me, I felt like, based on my career in banking and financial services, and that's the way I function. And so to me, it made sense to be at this particular decision-making table so that I can look at the policies that create the inequity, so that I can ask the tough questions. Because if you're not in a place of power, you don't get to ask those questions. And even if you do, you're not listened to or you're not heard. And so that's the privilege that I have now. And I'm, to my friends in the room, I need your help to hold me accountable as well, because our community cannot wait. Our communities cannot wait. And so I will use my privilege to better things for all of us and to truly address these inequities. And y'all call me out, because this is about action. And we're gonna need to do it together. But it is back to that thin line of how do you do that in a way that people are open to. And so I'm gonna focus on that love.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a little bit of time left for our panel segment. And I want to drop in some definitions because we've been talking about these things, and there's two words that come up a lot in these conversations that we have, and that's equity and equality. And they're used generally kind of interchangeably. But I want to drop in some more specifics about that, just to help our audience just hear perspectives of what that means. So I looked around online, and I found what I thought was the simplest definition that I found. And that is, equity is about sameness. It focuses on making sure that everyone gets the same thing. Equity is about fairness. It ensures that each person gets what each person needs. So I didn't say it right. Equality is about sameness. Equity is about fairness. Okay, one more time. Equality is about sameness. Equity is about fairness. So what does it mean to be equitable? How does that look and feel? How does that look and feel? And I'm going to throw in, what would a more equitable Longmont in our community, Boulder County, Longmont, look like? Can we give some pictures, something textural?
For me, when I talk about equity, we have to look at, are there inequities? And I'm going to use the flood of 2013 as a really simple example, because in 2013, the flood occurred. In 2015, the state of Colorado started to look around and ask how vulnerable populations, their term, were affected in that flood. And I was hired in October of 2016 to start looking at where the inequities of access to resources during that flood were for specifically monolingual Spanish speakers. That's an afterthought. But in 2017, Carmen Ramirez and I, she was my supervisor on the project, were able to connect a monolingual Spanish-speaking family who'd been waiting since 2013 to get connected to FEMA to address the displacement of their property from the flood. That to me is an inequity. And I can share with you from the voices of Boulder County residents in every sector in Boulder County where the disconnect of service and resource and programming. So that to me is an example of an equity of access to assistance. And so what does an equitable county or Longmont look like? And this, to me, it connects to Brett's point of we're in fear. Why? Because we've never lived in an equitable country. And so it should cause us fear. And it's such a significant opportunity to imagine what would it be like if during the Cowwood fire, all of the families had the same ability to get to resources quick, or during COVID, to get economic assistance right when COVID hit. We know there were mom and pop businesses that didn't get to the assistance, and then the big companies and organizations who did. So to imagine how everybody would have an ability to just get help, however that looks and whatever time it is to me the focus.
Thank you. We have time maybe for one more input on that. Anybody else? Please.
I think a more equitable Longmont would be having two schools that are less than 4 miles apart. One is, I think it's 80% Hispanic, and they are, I want to say 85% free and reduced lunch and the lowest test scores. And then literally less than 4 miles away, there's an elementary school that's predominantly white and right around 5 to 6% free and reduced lunch and extremely high test scores. So if everybody in Longmont could realize that this is happening here, we always call it the Boulder County bubble. This is happening in your hometown. So what are we gonna do about it? Well, let's admit that it exists first. And then we can maybe get something done. That's what a more equitable Longmont looks like to me.
Thank you. First, let's look at it and say something about it. First step. And that goes back to that word you used, invisible. All the invisible people. So let's make them visible. So that's what we're going to end with for this piece. I'm going to bring y'all back towards the end for one last little juicy bit. But I want to just thank you all so much for diving into this conversation and for sharing, some difficult stories and information, and for bringing forward some light into the situations that we're talking about. So thank you so much. So I'm going to just roll this over to Justin. Do we have any Q&A for some questions or from our audience members?
Not quite yet, but I will share with you a few comments that came up. Elvira Ramos quotes Shirley Chisholm, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair," which I thought was good. That explains all the folding chairs backstage. Beautiful poem. Power. Let's see, what do we have here? Any questions from Facebook? Hello, Facebook. Can you hear me, Facebook? We did post, I should let everyone know out there that we did post a link on our Facebook page to resources that the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee has put together on their website. So there's a link to that on our Facebook page if you're following us on Facebook. Okay, here we go. What are a few tangible things LMAC can do to further equity?
They doing enough?
I can speak a little bit to this. So LMAC is made up of a group of community members, right? So I think that a piece that LMAC can continue to do is keep having conversations like this. And my challenge to the people that are joining us this evening and others that will continue to watch is to start having these kinds of conversations. It starts with first you. So ask yourself, what does equity mean for you? What are you doing to make Longmont more equitable? And even thinking about your privileges, right? So what privileges do you have? And how do those show up in the different areas of the things that you do? So I think that by having these conversations as a group and sharing that experience and people really thinking about how they perceive equity and the work that they're doing, that's first step to continuing this work. So, and looking at that resource guide too that LMAX can be putting out, there's a lot of things that you can start having conversations with your kids. There's storybooks to start that conversation young, right? Because that gives you more time to learn about it and to live by it.
Thanks, Jenny.
And then one other here, we have another question from Martine Martinez. How do we bring equity to government or county-run departments?
How do we bring equity to government? There's a policy piece about how we hire. What is the policy around who we hire and who are the people that are sitting in that room making the decisions, reviewing not just resumes, but asking the questions? Have those folks had this conversation about equity? And so from government standpoint, I think it's how do we ensure that our folks are using an equity lens? How do we ensure that those folks are believers of an equitable Longmont or an equitable Boulder County? How do we ensure that the staffs and the folks who are reviewing different policies also share that vision of inclusivity and representation and the good for our entire community? That's a quick response to that question.
And I want to tag on to that because I'm going to ask you something else. Maybe you can deepen a little bit for us. So these are the concepts to reach into more equitable spaces within our departments. But what are some of the things that individuals can do to bring themselves to the place of what they can do in their workplace? And that could be anybody, yeah.
Go to school, get a degree, because that's the only way that the people in those positions are going to take you seriously. Go get educated.
And what about the people that already are that haven't had these conversations? Haven't moved past that fear to explore and learn for themselves? What would you say would be some just good basic first steps for that?
I think mentoring is an incredible opportunity. Almost everybody could use mentoring. It's just getting a wise and trusted counselor to walk alongside you and guide you through some things. Another thing that, well, I may be deviating a little bit, but we have boards and commissions, and we're talking about the workplace. How about the people in the workplace volunteering for some of these boards and commissions? You know, what people say is, we looked for people and we couldn't find anybody. And I mean, I think I've just about boarded out and commissioned out because I have, every time people think of a person of color, it's like, call Glenda Robinson, she'll serve. I can't serve no more. I don't have any more hours in my day or in my week. But there are people out there who can, and like LMAC, it's a good mentoring place. There are people there who will take you by the hand and walk you through, you know, getting experience at whatever. LMAC is doing incredible things. I can tell you this, the Boulder County chapter or branch of the NAACP is doing amazing things in the Boulder County community. And so I guess the word is partner. Everybody's using that word. Find somebody to partner with if you want to learn something, if you want to have a conversation, if you want to do something. I think that's one of the ways that we can do it.
Thank you, Glenda.
Been my experience that you have to just slowly work on wearing down the resistance within the system. There may be individuals who become ready to face that fear and that discomfort from their position of privilege, but I haven't had much success working on that. And where I have had success, and what made me think about that, is in community, just trying to do what I can as a mentor wherever I can. There's some really good programs, the Leadership Fellows, the Pearl program, and so on. I've agreed to help. I've reached out and tried to help whenever I can, and the people there the people who, you know, I spoke to or helped with whatever talk I might have given, were really appreciative and carried it forward a lot of times. I got great feedback. So they were there, and they just needed somebody to reach over to them and be supportive. And it can just be on a personal level too, with people who you see promise in who are younger. But a lot of times we get so busy when we're doing the work that we forget that we can be bringing people along all the time. And even in the rest of my work, anytime I've taken the time to mentor somebody and just give them a tiny, it's strange, the tiniest bit of support and encouragement for somebody who's younger than you can mean the world and actually change a life course in an unbelievable way. So, and maybe there's something to be said to address those who are in fear and not ready, not quite ready, but almost ready to have the discussions and become vulnerable. Because if you think about it, we all, by being from the communities we're from, do enjoy a certain privilege. Our communities have a lot of strengths. I could have been white if I wanted to, but I'm not. It's in my heart. I'm happy as a Native person. And that's because there's certain strengths in being Native. So I have that privilege that I could share back. What I need from the other side is the actual openness and the actual, don't try to maintain your privilege or your hierarchical position. Meet me as an equal, and then I'll share that privilege with you in a mentorship relationship.
Love that. Thank you. Marta, were you going to say something?
We're here to have a real conversation, and so if there's white people who are done with their book study, or done having their initial conversation, or maybe done watching the movie, there's some what's the questions you can ask yourself? Are you an ally or are you an accomplice? And I have to shout out to my friend Stephanie Rose, who really brought that up, to Rose Spalding, who really brought that up. Like, what does that mean? And how do you check in on that? It means when you're in a meeting, whether it's virtual or wherever it is, as a white person, are you coming up in front of your friend who's a person of color? Are you standing next to that person? Or are you able to, and maybe this is part of that process, able to come behind that person and create skills, create opportunities, like Brett was just saying, opening doors for other folks to have their own voices, our own voices heard instead of yours. And I think that's just like a tangible, just check in on yourself. Are you speaking for your friend of color, or are you allowing that person to have the mic?
Love that. I'm gonna do a quick poem because you inspired me. This is called Best Parts. I am so vast, so luminous, so incredibly expansive that I am astounded on a continual basis that I can even fit into this body, into this mind, into this room. The vastness of my lusciousness extends before me like a red carpet, welcoming the world to perch upon my wings, to take flight, to soar, to celebrate this gift we have of each other. And yet, when I come into those rooms where there is no space for my vastness, my luminosity, my lusciousness, where my wings fold in and my breath is left behind me, the best parts of me are left out, and they didn't even notice that I was not there. All right. So, I'm gonna roll this back to Justin. And we have resources next.
Well, we pinned the resources to our Facebook page in the comments. So if you're on Facebook, you can click there, and it'll take you straight to those resources. You can also wade through the City of Longmont's website. Just Google City of Longmont, and it'll take you there. We may go ahead and post these resources to our event page on our museum website, so you can go to longmontmuseum.org as well if you're looking for those resources.
Could you just say a little bit more about what those resources encompass?
They're broken down into, remind me, Adriana? Education, awareness, and courage.
Love that, especially like the courage part.
Me too.
So for all of you who are curious out there, check out the resource pages, please. All right, then. So to help us close out, I'd like us to drop into a story. And if each of you, or whoever wants to, share a situation, an event, a place, a community, where you've been, where you truly felt the equity and inclusivityness. Is that a word? Inclusivityness. Inclusive. Where you felt that you were fully included. So, because for those that aren't necessarily dealing with this in the greater community, may not quite understand the texture of it. You know what I mean? So if you would share any story that you have that might help us out with that, to just, what does that feel like? And why did you feel that way?
Well, do I dare? I'll go first. And I will say, I mentioned that we do have a I think it's 3 years old, a chapter of the NAACP Boulder County branch. It's not a chapter, it's a branch. And I joined, I'm not one of the founding members, but I joined shortly after they organized. And to be honest with you, it felt so good because I've been fighting this fight since I was 19 years old, for 53 years. And to be able to tell the story of how we got here, and one of the things I do is tell stories, but they're real life stories. And so to be able to be there and be accepted and do what I do best, and for people to value that, it feels really good. It's like, I'm home. Welcome home. They're interested in my, my 53-year history. They're interested in my my upbringing. I grew up outside of Memphis in a little country town where we couldn't go to the parks, the pools. Some of you can't even relate to that, but this was the segregated Jim Crow South. We could not go to the parks, the pools, the libraries. I went to all black schools. You couldn't go to the zoo except on one Thursday a month for a black school. Couldn't go to the fair except the last weekend of the fair. And we didn't know most of the rides were broken. But just to have people say, tell us more. We want to hear more. Because that too, or that especially, was the price of freedom as well. Freedom isn't free. I know many people who've died so that we can have this right, but I get to tell these stories there. Thank you.
Yes, get to tell the stories. Thank you, Glenda. Anybody else have a story to share?
I can honestly say I never felt true inclusivity until I left Longmont, which is sad to say. I can't think of too many times in Colorado where I felt like this is a place where I belong, where I'm welcome, where I'm home. I've had it other places, and there's moments of it here, there's glimmers of it. It's mostly with my family. But as a community, and I love Longmont. Used to not love it, but now I do. But I can't say that in this town I ever have. That's real talk.
Thank you, Lauren.
I think an example of when I've felt true inclusivity is I took a ethnic studies class in college, and that was the first time that I saw more than 3 pages of people that looked like me in a history book. And to have that experience when you're in college, I couldn't wrap my head around why it wasn't a possibility to have that in my elementary school, in my high school, in my middle school education. And I felt like I could one day be the person that's there. It gave me the power to feel like I could be a leader. Because even growing up, there were leaders in the community that I looked up to, but I think that you don't see the power of what you can actually do just by being who you are, right? So by seeing those leaders on the textbook, I knew that just by being who I was and the experiences that I hold, which now I know the term for that is being a cultural broker, that's what gave me my power.
Take your power. Anybody else?
I'll share a quick experience for me, and this is a tough question. My background, I think I shared, is in banking and mortgage real estate, and I'm part of an organization called the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, and we're more than 33,000 members around the United States, and when we get together, it's a room of 5,000 Latina professionals who we all speak the language of financial literacy and investment, and so there's that connection. And the bigger connection is that we always, we're entre familia, because we're all working every day in a really tough industry to address the financial wealth gap around the entire country. So there's this feeling of unity about purpose, about who we are, and we come from all around the world. And being able to speak our language, even though some of it's different dialect, and we know who the Puerto Ricanos are, but it's this sense of not just unity, but love and purpose. And so, yeah, just your question tonight, Norma, about for folks who don't know why it hurts so bad to not be in that space or to have somebody treat you like you're invisible. Like, I'm gonna be thinking about this conversation for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta.
That's a great question. I think when I think about it locally, it's really kind of tough. Yeah, I think local's actually telling though too. The places where I felt most that way, or the times when I felt most that way locally, is in those contexts where difference, my difference, and other people's difference and uniqueness wasn't really so much of an eccentricity or so much of an exoticness, but rather it was just a richness that was contributed. So something like the diversity in this room feels really good to me. And when I've had those rare occasions locally, like, certain gatherings, familia and their friends, so that there's already connections and so on. And that happens in Longmont. But those are the times that have felt best and most comfortable.
Familia, yes. Thank you. I call it my people. All right, so thank you. That was a beautiful note to end on, your sharing of what inclusivity feels like and what it doesn't feel like. So I just want to thank our audience, our virtual audience, and our small but mighty live audience here. Thank you so much for joining us. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us and just giving some real talk for our conversation tonight. May it continue. May it continue out in this community and beyond. So I'm going to throw it back to Justin to close us out.
I want to thank everyone for joining us online on Facebook and longmontpublicmedia.org and on Comcast Channel 8. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I also want to thank our panelists, Jesse. Jenny Diaz-Leon, Lauren Jenkins, Glenda Robinson, Marta Lochamin, Brett Lee Shelton, and our moderator this evening, Norma Johnson. Thanks for a beautiful panel. It was a lovely evening, really. Next week, we have another program lined up on Thursday at 7:30. It is a celebration of the 50th anniversary of Su Teatro in Denver. We'll be joined by their executive director, Tony Garcia, and he'll be in conversation with one of their main playwrights, Bobby Lefebvre, who is also our Colorado State Poet Laureate. So it should be a really dynamic conversation and celebration of 50 years of one of Denver's, long-time, super established, Latino-based performing arts organizations. Thanks for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you on the internet. Take care.